In this video, I'm going to talk about a relatively common problem, which is fireflies, which are caused by direct light being very close to another surface. So in this case, I've got a point light, which is in the corner of the room, and you can see it's casting a very, very bright spot on each of the walls next to it. So the cause of these fireflies is basically because this very bright spot is messing up the global illumination. If I switch to my direct lighting output, you can see there's this huge bright spot here. And now when I switch to my indirect lighting output, this bright spot basically is causing problems with the GI because as certain pixels are firing rays out into the scene, some of those samples are finding this really bright spot and others aren't, which is why we get these very bright fireflies in the indirect illumination. And we also get a similar effect in the blurry reflections, because blurry reflections work in a very similar way. At each pixel, rays are fired out into the scene, and so some of the pixels are sampling this very bright spot and others aren't. And if I switch to nuke and examine the final color output, it might be a little bit clearer to you why this very bright spot is causing a problem. Because although it is quite large on this wall, in the context of the entire scene, it isn't really that big. It's a relatively small part of the entire environment, because remember that the rays that are fired into the scene from the wall or from the reflections, they're sampling the entire environment. So this very bright spot is comparatively small, but the contrast here is really, really large. If you keep your eye on these numbers down here, the RGB values and also the total luminance values, you can see that as we're just outside the bright spot, the values are below 1. As we go in, they very quickly climb above 1. And as we head towards the center of this very bright spot, we see some of the values go all the way up to sort of 45 or 50. Occasionally I see 50 in the red values. Depends exactly where I sample from. Let me just try and find the absolute maximum. And the other thing is, and you can really see this as I'm sort of trying to sample this area, the values fluctuate really high. Here you go. I've got a value, total luminance value here of 54, and my red value is 59. So you can see just within this area the contrast is really, really high, but compared to out here, then the contrast is extremely high. And this really high contrast is what's being reflected in these fireflies, because the fireflies are finding this contrast in some cases, as some of the pixels being sampled are returning with really high values, while neighboring pixels are returning with much lower values, and this is why we get this speckly effect. So what can we do to try and improve this situation and make these fireflies disappear? Well, if I go back to my final color output and let me draw a render region around this area here, and I'll tick use render region. You can go back to the scene and just see a couple of methods I have of dealing with them. So the simplest thing you can do is if you go to your point light and turn simple shading on, that alone is going to really help. Now there are of course some cases where you might need simple shading to be off, in which case this solution won't work, but this is the easiest and quickest. So I'm just going to do a test render so we can see what that does. So you can see with my test render completed that the area where the render region was drawn is completely firefly free, and I think in most cases this would be the best approach to take, because it's the quickest and it's really the most effective, and in many ways the one with the least amount of compromise involved. But if you do need simple shading to be off in your light, then there's two other approaches that I can show you. So I'm going to return to the scene once again, and I'm going to turn simple shading off once again. And the second approach I'm going to show you is using gradients to basically attenuate your light over a certain distance. So let me just enable these gradients, and I'm going to open them in the gradient editor. So what I've got here is I've got a gradient on the light diffuse amount and an instance of the same gradient on the light specular amount. That should deal with most circumstances. However, if the surface that your very bright light is close to also has subsurface scattering, well, unfortunately, as there isn't a light SSS amount control, you'll have to use light color instead. I find that a little bit harder to manage because then there's 3 channels you have to deal with rather than just one value channel, because you'll be dealing with RGB instead of just one value. So this is a little bit simpler, which is why I prefer it. So what I've got here is basically my locator for my gradient is placed with the light. Let's just let me just show you these in the 3D scene. Just take a second to tumble to the right spot. So I'm just going to hit O on my viewport to make sure that lights are visible, and then I'm going to toggle, pardon me, texture locators on. And if I select the point light and I hold Shift A, let's locate where the point light is. And you can see that texture locator here that is basically in the same position as my light is the texture locator for this gradient. So if I now reopen my gradient editor, what I'm doing is that I'm saying that areas that are really, really close to this locator are attenuated very, very strongly. So I'm just going to really exaggerate it. Let's go to 1 millimeter, and let's even put the value to 0. And then as distance from the light increases, then I allow the brightness of the light to increase as well. So how well does this work? Well, you can get this to work pretty well, but the best way to find out is to do a test render. And with the render complete, you can see that this trick with the gradient has also really helped with the Fireflies. However, if I compare it to the original and then the version with simple shading, you can see that I've also managed to really darken this wall, and that's obviously because the values in the gradient don't really match the original values. I'm sure if I sort of played with the gradient a bit more, I could get a better match that still didn't have too many Fireflies. But you can see that this method, although quite effective, is going to require a bit more tweaking and a bit more work. So the third method, which I'm going to show you, let me just disable these gradients, is a channel in the GI settings, which is called maximum radiance. So if I select the render item and then go to the channels, I now need to just go through and look for the one called maximum radiance. So there it is. And what this is going to do is basically going to clamp my GI. So it's similar to clamping your final color output, but obviously when you clamp your final color output, you're clamping everything. You're clamping the direct lighting, you're clamping the reflections, etc. Whereas here, by using the maximum radiance channel, I'll only be clamping the global illumination, which basically means that I can tame the contribution to the GI that's coming from this direct light. Now, this method does have some drawbacks, obviously, but it's also pretty effective. So I'm going to enter a value of 5, which means that that is going to be the maximum value allowed in my global illumination. And once again, I'm going to fire a test render. And with the latest render complete, you can see that once again I've managed to eliminate the Fireflies. But there's also some visible darkening on the wall, not quite as much as in the previous render, but you can see when I compare it to the render where simple shading was on, the walls are noticeably darker. And that's not surprising, because by limiting the maximum radiance, I'm essentially allowing less light into the scene, which is how I'm taming the contrast that's found over here. Now, if you are going to use the maximum radiance channel to eliminate Fireflies, there is one issue that you do need to be aware of, and that is if you have an HDR in your scene, that is also going to be clamped, because HDRs form part of the global illumination calculations. So, for example, if you have an environment HDR with a very bright sun and you're using that to do some lighting in your scene, bear in mind that if you're going to clamp the maximum radiance, that you will be clamping that HDR as well, so its values might not end up being what you want. So that is one potential downfall of this method, but otherwise it can be very effective for dealing with high contrast in your GI. And it might not just be caused by a situation such as this one. You might encounter situations where you have very small light sources that have to be calculated by global illumination for one reason or for another. And in those cases you can get a lot of noise, especially if the lights are very bright. So that's another time where maximum radiance could help you to get cleaner renders. So you can see that you do have several approaches for dealing with fireflies in your scenes. And this particular problem with a light source being very close to a wall, a direct light being very close to another surface, is one that I've encountered relatively frequently in production. So it is a pretty common one. And I've offered you 3 different ways of dealing with it. So hopefully one of those 3 should be able to cover every situation where you encounter this particular problem.